And we're live. Just a few pre-podcast adjustments there, Mr. Cowley.
Yeah, it's always fun just when the time is counting down.
I'm responsible for production this morning, so just trying to get my tea time at Huapai with Rick James and George McFly at 2:20. So we've
Getting
been
the essentials sort of
a little bit rushed, and Liam's been a bit unfairly rushed in here to use his boyish charm as a leverage or marketing tool to get more views. We just thought we'd give a little précis on what's been going on in our business this year, and not because we're completely full of ourselves and want to talk about ourselves, but we thought it may be of some interest to other business owners out there who want to glean a little bit about what the sort of state of the nation is in the SME game. So what we're seeing at the moment is a lot less conveyancing, and talking to our friends at the banks and mortgage brokers and agents, is that the CCCFA has caused a
consternation, to say the least.
Wouldn't be an understatement to say it's caused serious consternation in those markets, and for good reason. And just to spitball a little bit about that quickly, I'm thinking of that first drive off one at Huapai this afternoon already.
Yeah.
But just to spitball a little bit about that, what we're seeing is, and anecdotally, it's not statistically proven, is that the banks don't know where the line in the sand is in terms of sanction for them for approving someone then who was arguably outside of the very overly prescriptive rules around scrutiny. Yep. And so they want to see, and interestingly, there is a review which is apparently being conducted at the moment, and there's supposed to be some communication from the government mid-February as to which is it, isn't it mid-February now? It's almost mid-February. All blows into one really when you're back at work. But yeah, there's supposed to be a review underway at the moment with some formal feedback in April as to how the CCCFA is going. I think it's going to have to be amended. There was a great article. You go.
Yeah, no, just because, as you said, it seems like because there is that sort of big question mark over sort of things like sanctions and stuff for these banks, they've kind of ended up sort of erring on the side of caution in almost every instance, because it's sort of saying, well, why would they stick their neck out if you could end up being fined, X amount of dollars? So that's really why it's become quite difficult for customers.
They don't want to be none of the banks want to be the first one to take the hit,
have the hit on their block.
But there's an interesting article on interest.co.nz who we subscribe to, and we rate highly. It was with Vittoria, I forget her surname, the CEO at ASB, and she was one of the economists was having a go at her about how banks have, in his view, had a lot of blame to take for the inflated asset prices of property, on the basis that without their willingness or yearnfulness, is that even a word, to lend to mum and dad type investors, the prices wouldn't be what they are today. I mean, I think there's some truth to that. Her response was, though, which was very wordy, and I didn't really, it was too late at night to really decipher what she was getting at. But I got there in the end, and I think she was trying to say that, well, yes, but we still lend to people within the criteria who, based on how if you take the macroeconomic situation in terms of people investing in property first and foremost as a given, and if they can afford it, then they're going to lend to them. And she's saying that otherwise it would be credit rationing, and that's never worked in the past. And there's an element of truth to that as well.
Yeah, 100%.
So anyway, so what I was saying about that with ASB is so there was the article, and just to she was quoted, and then the Economist comes in, but ultimately, in the end of the day, residential property ownership and speculation has been a part of the backbone of our economy for a long, long time, for better or worse. And the way the system is set up or predicated at the moment, it can't continue because of these new rules. Whether the government had the intention to curtail it or curb lending quite to the degree that they have now, maybe in a year's time, another GFC will come and they'll look very smart for curtailing it in this way, because it's not just a given that people should be able to borrow, say, $2 million for an asset which produces very little actual return other than arguably inflated capital gains. But time will tell, and at the moment it's certainly capturing all and sundry, as opposed to what you would think to be the more vulnerable sections of society.
No.
We're seeing a downturn in residential conveyancing.
Yeah.
We are seeing some refis. We're seeing a downturn in businesses being bought and sold. We're seeing a lot more sort of pre-insolvency, requests for instruction. We're seeing restructuring instructions come through. Liam's working on a few interesting ones at the moment. Shareholders agreements. There's definitely activity out there, but a lot of it, would you agree, Liam, seems to stem from existing business people or businesses which aren't quite so affected by.
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of two parts. It's sort of more people kind of looking inward as to sort of what their operations and how they're running at the moment, and sort of doing a bit of house cleaning in that respect, like you sort of said, tying things up with shareholders agreements and making sure everyone's sort of on board with how they're or even making sure everyone's on board with where the company, if it's a company, is going. And yeah, then there's also just those aspects of just sort of maybe future proofing, looking at sort of, okay, maybe if this Omicron thing really does take off, what are sort of our options if we do get into financial strife? I mean, last round, there was all those sort of government safe harbors introduced and stuff, and they're just sort of getting a touch and feel of whether those still apply, and or at least they expect the government to introduce similar things again like that in this round because they're expired for the most part. And so that's sort of a lot of the advice that they're sort of seeking in the first instance.
Our volume off. We remember to look at the camera. Because it will look like
we're
down a lot. Liam, great points. And just to touch quickly on, you've got to be feeling it right now for hospo owners. I mean, it's even more brutal at the moment. I was talking to a friend of mine, John Ricardo, who owns a number of hospo business, famously Circus, and he never got the clown back that got stolen a few years ago. There's rumours it was at a well-known real estate agent from Ponsonby's back yard, and that based on some beef in the 80s. Knowing John, that's probably true, but anyway, we can only speculate. But yeah, no, back to much more
Bozo.
Yeah, much more serious matters. Down, I think, is 8% on year and 11% on pre-COVID for January, and that was with a reasonable period before we were red lighted. It's brutal out there, and now no subsidies on top of that. I mean, yeah, it must just be, I don't have a lot of hair left, but some of these guys must have none, because your heart has to go out to them. And I mean, man, that just must be so brutal at the moment.
Yeah.
And hospo's not the only industry. I'm sure there's more if you looked, if you pull back the curtains a bit.
Customer facing.
Yeah. So our friend Brent Norling over at Norling Law the other day, he reckons there's going to be just a spate of insolvencies this year, and you've got to be
reckoning.
Yep, and you've got to be thinking that he's right, being that close to the coalface, which is really sad as well. And so yeah, we just wanted to, anyway. We're not going to grab it on.
It's not. Yeah, again, like we were saying before, though, it's not all doom. It's just bearing that in mind. You just need to be very, as I'm sure a lot of these people are, is being proactive. Actually making sure that having those sort of questions like, how are we going to get through any sort of tumultuous waters, making sure you have an actual action plan, as opposed to, and I'm not saying obviously people do, but then rely on sort of government subsidies, because I mean, at the best of times, those help to get by somewhat. They're really not sort of a complete kind of cure or balm to the problem.
Yeah, I think that what I'd say to that is that I think that the real measure of whether you're going to survive and eventually, hopefully thrive again, is that it's real income is what is required, as opposed to subsidy income. And you could sail pretty close to the wind, and if it's for macroeconomic or COVID/macroeconomic considerations that everyone's struggling from, but then some businesses were already pretty close to the line without COVID and all these issues. And if you look at those businesses, will you be able to continue, or are you digging yourself a deeper hole so that the harm right now might be unpalatable yet manageable in the grander scheme of your ability to do something else and get on with your life? You don't want, say for example, $80,000 or $100,000 problem. It's not ideal, and it might be a real hard. It's like when you're playing poker and you're down $1,000 and you think, do I walk out of the casino now? It's 3 a.m. My wife might not kill me when I get home because I've lost $950 plus some shoestring fries and a couple of a
few vodka sodas
and your parking ticket at $42 or whatever it would be these days. I don't go there up to Sky City. Or do you come home at 6 a.m. the sun's out, you've lost 2.5.
Your tie's already sort of draggled out. Your shirt suit's a bit scruffy.
Yeah, and you don't want to buy a pack of Marlboro Reds because on the logic that you've already lost $2,500 that night. We digress, but yeah, so you get the point. You don't want to continue, even though it's really hard sometimes to pull the pin and then make it into a $300,000 or $500,000 problem, and then something which materially may take you the rest of your working life to come back from, as opposed to walking away when it was unpalatable yet manageable. And get in touch with a great insolvency practitioner like Brent Norling or someone. We even ask them, we can direct you to other practitioners in the area, good accountants, people to help you manage your situation if you are struggling in that way.
And I'd say that's also especially so for companies where there are more obviously than just sort of owner operators, where there are sort of just sort of maybe passive investors, shareholders, because not only will you start to have sort of creditors breathing down your neck, you'll also have someone who's basically sort of said, mate, you promised me sort of this was going to be the problem. Now all of a sudden, my investment's not looking great. So now you actually have a little bit more closer to home. Sometimes it could be a little bit easier to sort of stonewall any kind of agitated creditors. But when you have a guy who is, or whoever is basically in your business, it can just be a little bit more difficult. So you just have to really make sure you're managing that.
It's an awesome point. I read something a while ago from a famous entrepreneur, and they said, unless it's your mum or your dad, anybody that's lent you money for a business expects some sort of return at some point. And like Liam just said, the gloves may come off in that situation, and that could cause more of that agitation or that level of discomfort if it's close to you and it's emotional and it's in your community. It's someone you go to the pub with or go to bowls with or golf with or bridge. Mum's a big
backgammon, if you will.
Backgammon. That may actually cause you more consternation in your clique or your social community than, say, a faceless bank who your debt's gone from 100K to 120 and you're now making noises about calling it up. So look, we're all in it together. Everyone has suffered from it to some extent, either whether it's financially, emotionally, socially, whatever. Maybe their health as well. And so we're here to help you if you need it. Happy to reach out, even if it's just for a chat, no obligation chat about where you're at, and maybe we could help you, or maybe someone in our networks could help you. So you're not alone out there. I hope you maybe got, even if you learned one tiny thing from this, somewhat soliloquist. Is that a word, Liam? You're more of a...
you're very inventive with these words. I say it with confidence. And
I've just decided I'm going to have my own kind of language on this show.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go all Joe Rogan and say all sorts of despicable things, but we're not on Spotify anyway, but we're going to keep it clean, but we may come up with the odd kind of bent out of shape adjective or noun, and we're just going to keep rolling with it because
creative license. It's our podcast,
and maybe one day we'll even create an NFT and put it on there, and then there'll be absolutely no way to police us. Some shit banter to end the chat, but we'll see you.
Real clutching at straws there.
Yep.
Thanks, mate.
Pleasure, mate. The button didn't work. It's about to fire off a real